Hey, tailgaters! Ross of the Pigskin Tales podcast here. Feel that summer heat? It's not just the sun, it's the thrill of upcoming college football season, stoking the coals. So get ready for the season. Dive into the history books with Homefield, the premium collegiate apparel brand from Indianapolis. Homefield crafts incredibly comfortable gear designed with iconic vintage nods over 150 colleges. A library of history right on your chest. Homefield is the Indiana Jones of collegiate apparel, uncovering hidden gems from school archives. Unique mascots, logos, and even unforgettable moments frozen in time. Visit homefieldapparel.com and shop the archives. Homefield Apparel, where comfort, nostalgia, and the spirit of college football history unite. Again, that's homefieldapparel.com.
In this episode, we get to talk about a legendary college and Pro Football Hall of Fame quarterback with his daughter, who has recently wrote a book about him and released it. We have this story and more coming up in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with pigskindispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of pigskindispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And boy, do we have a great episode tonight. We're going to be talking to an author that wrote a book, and a book that's very personal to her. The book's title is The Dutchman and the Portland's Finest Rose, a love story inspired by the life of football legend Norm Van Brocklin. Karen J. Vanderyt is her name, daughter of Norm Van Brocklin. Karen, welcome to the Pig Pen.
Thanks for having me, Darren. I look forward to visiting with you about the book.
Yeah, Karen, this book was very exciting. I just got done reading it today. I love doing that, so it's very fresh in my mind. And this is one that really I got attached to and got really engrossed into. And, that's a sign of great writing. So you did a very good job on this book.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Now, Karen, okay, we sort of gave away that you were the daughter of Norm Van Brocklin, and your mother was Gloria Shiwi, and, they were a very loving married couple, as you make evident in the book. And why don't you give us a little bit of more background on yourself?
Well, I came to writing much later in my life, but it was really as my mother was quite ill, I discovered love letters that my father had written to my mother. And I was the oldest of my sisters, and I have two brothers. And when I discovered them, it was kind of like, do I read them? Do I not read them? What do I do with them? And I kept them. And I did read I read the top one, and it was kind of an overwhelming time for me. So I read them, I cried, I put them back together. I put the little piece of twine around the letters. That's how my mother had them all stacked together, and little piece of twine. And it wasn't until years later, after I had lost my husband to cancer, that I rediscovered them. And then it was like that moment where you just have to decide, what do I do? What do I do with them? It's like they had a voice, they had a message. I couldn't not pay attention to them. And that led me to reading each letter, putting them in order. And what sort of was apparent to me, it was my parents' early history together, and at the University of Oregon, and which is where they met. They both were students, and it led me to doing research and reaching out to people at the University of Oregon and people he played with, and children of the players that was on the same team that provided information, and scrapbooks, and just a wealth of information. And for me, this was it was a 6-year journey that I took. And it was gratifying to me, but I think I have gotten some positive feedback, just as you have shared, that it's a lovely love story. And more than that, it's sort of a window in time. It's a slice in time. And I think, sometimes to take a break and sort of pause and look back is sort of good for all of us. So that was my moment.
But you did it very excellently. And your parents, it was very interesting. You make this point in the book. There's many times where they were away from each other, where they promised each other they would write every day. So you had almost like a journal entry for some periods of their relationship together, of a daily event.
Yeah. Well, and it gave me a framework, right? Because though it was very personal, there were enough snippets of facts that led me to, the research. So it was very helpful. And, I recognized many of the names that they talked about, as players that were on the team, 47, 48, 49. And so that was kind of cool too.
Yeah, it's just so the listeners understand this, and I don't think I'm giving away anything here. You have 53 chapters in the book, and there's only 2 of the chapters that I'm aware of where you would have been in the picture. You would have been alive during. So most of this is prior to your birth.
Yes.
And
yes.
Before you were with your parents' relationship, and that's
right.
That is just such a cool thing that you were able to get that much detail and from these letters and putting the pieces together, like you said, which is very interesting. So I guess the first thing we got to start off with is your parents met at the University of Oregon, like you said, but it was kind of a unique meeting, something that you don't hear very often. And I thought it was very romantic and sort of a beautiful way that they met, and kind of unique, if you don't mind sharing that.
No, it was beautiful. So my father had just, World War II had just ended. He, though he was an excellent athlete in high school in California, back in the day, there weren't scholarships. There weren't, he didn't have any promised positions at any one school, but he was well known as a pitcher at Acalanes High School, and also a halfback. And what was eye-opening to me is that I always assumed that my dad, since he was a Hall of Famer later, an All-American and NFL Hall of Famer, that he just, there was a spot waiting for him. He was a 6th string walk-on as a halfback at the University of Oregon. He'd never shared that information with me. So anyway, he followed a couple of classmates from Acalanes High School. He had just been discharged from the Navy. It was January. He walked on campus, and as he was trying to find his way to his first class, he bumped into my mother underneath this big oak leaf maple and big leaf maple tree right in front of Dee Dee Hall. It's since been renamed. I don't recall the new name, but that was one of the original buildings on the main quad at the University of Oregon, and it's where the science classes were held. And they both claimed that it was love at first sight. So that's how they met. And now, after they both have passed away, my sisters and I and my brothers have all dedicated a bench that has their name on it, that recognizes that, or makes mention of that meeting and honors their life, and it has their birth date and when they graduated from the University of Oregon. And there's a beautiful bench with a plaque.
And you have a photograph of that in the book. So that's the actual tree that they met under. And I know they had a couple tender moments throughout the book under that same tree that you mentioned, which kept returning back to that point, which I thought was a great sight. And Okay, I was going to ask you about that. So I'm glad you clarified that. I was wondering if that was possibly the tree. So
Yeah, it's
very
still there, and the bench is still there, and the plaque is still there.
good. Very, very neat. Now, yeah, so I found it interesting too. That's something, you were surprised. I was surprised that your dad was a walk-on. And from his own commentary that you wrote in the book, he was unsure if he was even going to make the team. And there's
Oh
a
yeah,
good period of the book where it's unclear if he's going to be on Oregon's team that year under
yeah,
his original coach at Oregon was Tex Oliver. And
right.
he sort of had a love-hate relationship, I guess, especially maybe not
Hmm.
hate, but it was
Yeah,
kind of a roller
contentious.
coaster ride
Yeah.
relationship, I guess. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that, what your dad was immersed to as he joined Oregon's football
Uh,
team as a
well,
walk-on.
I think, and he always did pay a lot of respect to Jim Aiken, who was the coach that came in the very next season. And at that time, excuse me, in the NFL, it's pretty much a running game. And so there was a position called the quarterback, but that a quarterback typically ran, it's kind of like an option play, right?
Mhm.
There wasn't a lot of passing. And I believe it was Stanford at the time was starting to uh, throw in some passing plays. And Jim Aiken, who came from the East Coast, I think it was called not William and Mary,
No,
but
he was at
is it
Washington and
Washington
Jefferson.
Lee? Yeah, Washington Jefferson. That's it.
Right. I'm I'm
And
I'm I'm in Western Pennsylvania, so that's right down the road from us. That's not
oh,
too far. It's
okay,
a couple hours
oh,
away.
okay. And so he, I think he was intrigued with that type of offense, and he brought it with him to the University of Oregon. And it was spring training, and they're all out there, running plays and doing all their thing. And it was evident that my dad had a great arm. So it was just one of those synergistic moments, right? Or serendipitous moments that they started, let me see what you got kind of a thing. And my dad was known for being able to throw a long ball, but also I think it was Tommy McDonald used to say, just drop it in your hands. Um, so he had great touch on the ball. And he also just had an uncanny understanding of defenses. So I could kind of see what was going on in the field, and he was very adept at kind of changing things at the last minute. And so Jim Aiken coming to Oregon really is what enabled my father, I think, to have the success he did, both in college, but also in the pros.
Yeah, and he didn't always have a great relationship with Aiken too. As a matter of fact, I
Yeah.
think at one point your mother and father were both a little bit upset with Coach Aiken, and
Mhm.
for a big momentous occasion in their lives. And maybe
Yeah.
you could chat about that a bit.
Yeah. So, well, my mother was 2 years older than my father. And I hope this comes across in the book too. She was a very serious student. She was a very intellectual person, and her plan before bumping into my dad underneath the maple tree was to become a physician. So we're talking 1946, right? So
Mhm.
not very many women were even accepted into medical school, but that was her plan. And she had to kind of navigate that. And being 2 years ahead of my dad was a freshman. She was a junior, and she, in that period of time, trying to figure out what she wanted to do, she ended up taking a job up in Portland. Well, dad was still on campus playing football and getting his C, keeping his C average going. Um, she decided that, her heart won over her, I guess, her mind. But she, I hope people kind of appreciate what it was like for women in that time. Um,
Yeah, you make a great point of it, because I think there's one point in the book where your mother's worried that now that there's men coming back from the war,
Yes.
that she might not get into medical school
Right.
because of being a woman.
Right. And as it turned out, she never did apply to medical school. She did apply to physical therapy school at Stanford and got accepted, and never told my dad that she applied nor that she got accepted. And I don't know if he ever knew that. Now that I think about it,
Hmm.
I don't know. But at any rate, to get back to Jim Aiken, they decided that they couldn't live apart from each other anymore. She'd taken a position at the hospital in Portland, working in the lab, and he was still back on campus. And, it was like, that wasn't going to work. They needed to get married. And Jim Aiken's opinion was, no, your concentration needs to be totally on football. And, that's where all your dedication needs to go to. So, they did go ahead and get married, and it was kind of like, that's what we're going to do. But their opinion of him was not that high at that moment. But, they made it work, and of course, Jim Aiken needed his quarterback. So
The whole dynamic of everything going on, because this was, he wasn't sure he was going to make the team, and all of a sudden, he becomes Aiken's quarterback. Oliver, right. You made it seem like Oliver really didn't give him much attention, but there were spots where Coach Oliver would say things to your dad. Hey, I've been watching you throw passes in practice,
mm-hmm.
and I've been doing this.
Mm-hmm.
When your dad thought he had turned his back and was paying
mm-hmm.
him, no, never mind. But I thought that was interesting. Now, your dad did such a great job of being a role model on how to court somebody he's in love with. And I thought this was very admirable the whole way. He was very patient. He did all the right things. He had a great relationship with your grandparents,
mm-hmm.
who lived up in
Portland,
different Portland, Oregon, a different part
mm-hmm.
of Oregon. And
mm-hmm.
how far away was that from the University of Oregon? It had to be some.
Well, today's time, it's about an hour and a half drive, and it's freeway. So, it only takes about an hour and a half. But back when they were in college, you had to take the bus. I mean, my parents didn't have cars. So that's how they got back and forth. Or if they were lucky enough to have a friend that had a car, they would, bum a ride with somebody back and forth. So it wasn't as easy as it is today.
Yeah, that's for sure. And they traveled quite a bit. You have them going back and forth quite a bit, visiting
mm-hmm.
your grandparents up in Portland, and
mm-hmm.
By train. But your parents, through their dating life and their early married life, they didn't have a great financial wealth to be doing things. They really had to scrape things together, and
right.
they always seemed to manage it. And your dad, did such a wonderful job of going up and and your grandparents, reciprocating with, the love that they had both for their future son-in-law and son-in-law once they were
mm-hmm.
married, along
mm-hmm.
with their daughter. And I thought that was just a beautiful thing in the relationship that they all had.
Yeah, they were very, well, it's different times, right? They all had survived the Depression. Both my parents were children of the Depression, and my father grew up in abject poverty. So, it's really a Grapes of Wrath story, that, they all left the plains of South Dakota in a flatbed truck, 9 children, my grandparents, 9 children, whatever could fit on the truck, and drove across to Walnut Creek, California. Now, Walnut Creek, California now is like a bedroom community, for the Bay Area. But at the time, it was one of these like Hoover towns. They lived in a tent with a wood burning stove. They all, whatever crop was in at the time, that's what they all did. My dad was 5. Even at 5, he was climbing trees, picking fruit, or picking whatever was, the crop was at the time. So as it took a family unit to survive, and that is sort of, I think that translated into how we viewed playing football. In the war, you had to be a team. When you were in the Navy, you had to be a team to survive. When you came back, you walked on the field as a walk-on, a football field. You had to work as a team to win games. And that really was his philosophy as a coach. I don't know if it translates as easily today, but back then, that was kind of the mentality.
Well, I think you see a lot of that success in all sports teams, working as a team, working like a family unit. And your parents, definitely did that. They worked together as a team, and they, like we said, they didn't have a lot financially going on. They were scraping together things, but these poor kids, just getting married, just bearing with daily life and trying to get by, just seemed to have tragedy after tragedy after tragedy, but they kept pulling themselves together, and the rest of your family, your grandmothers, helping out and things like that. But maybe you could just describe some of the, very emotional happenings that were going on in their early marriage.
Yes, well, and I think this was a very tough time for my mother, but her father, who Herbert was his name. And this is still, not uncommon when you in Oregon. Often he was a loggerman during the logging season and a fisherman in the fishing season. And you still sort of see that dynamic even today. And, he made ends meet. And my grandmother was a very resourceful person, and she was a homemaker. She did sewing on the side to keep things going. And they had that was always my sense, that they always had a very loving relationship. And my father was very drawn to that as well. And he loved his father-in-law, Herb. And they fished together and just got along famously. But he tragically, and I won't tell the whole story, but he tragically was out, and he never used to go fishing this time of year. February it was. The water can be very treacherous. The Columbia River is one of the most difficult rivers to navigate at the mouth. It's a very wide expanse, and the tides, there's a lot of variation in the tides, which creates, you got to know what you're doing. And there's a bar out there, a big sandbar, and a huge storm came in, northwesterly storm came in. Then we don't have the instrumentation we have today that would have said don't go out. But anyway, he did. He went out to help a colleague of his who was down and out, and he was trying to help him with a catch so that he could kind of true up his bank accounts. And the storm ended up capsizing the boat. There was some radio communication, so my grandmother was able to hear some of that. But the reality is the boat was never found. The men on the boat were never found. There was no wreckage. So my mother was only in her early 20s at this point, and it scarred her for life. It was like he was there one day and gone the next. And my grandfather, I never met him, of course. I wasn't born yet, but he really was instrumental in encouraging my mother to pursue academics. And I think when he was gone, it was a huge void for her and my grandmother, of course, and my father.
If I take the element out of this being a true story, and I just look at the characters of your grandfather Herb and your father's character Stubb, who was affectionately called by friends and family, I almost see a foreshadowing of your father and your grandfather. I think they seemed very similar They were men's men.
Oh
They
yeah.
they did manly things. They hunted, they fished, they did playing football, very manual things. But they were very tender in the home to the family, and
Hmm.
very supportive of the family. And I think so I'm not sure. Maybe you're they were just both that same breed, or maybe your grandfather was such a role model to your father, like you said, and
I
he
think there's
adopted a
some.
lot of that practice.
I think there's something to be said for that because though I did know my grandpa Van, I was pretty young when he passed away. Uh, my sense of him and what other family members have said, I mean, though he was a hardworking man, you know, just a very wonderful man. I mean, he had 9 mouths to feed.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Um, yeah, that's a lot. A very hardworking man, but he was kind of a humorless person. He was tough. And my dad was the eighth of 9 children. So I don't think a lot of attention got paid to him. I think his older sisters basically, reared my dad. And when you're that far down the food chain, you just everybody sort of pushes you along. But I think what he saw in his father-in-law was somebody that really was a role model for him, and I think he truly respected him as a result of that. And he adored my mother. My mother, um, he was just in awe of her.
And you make that very clear. And I think she must have been very in awe of him as well, because there's
Yes, she
very,
was.
very much a lot of tender moments where, you refer to when you're looking through her eyes into his eyes of, the sparkling blue eyes and things, they're very descriptive, and you could tell it's a very loving and great relationship that they had, and they needed to be, because not only the loss of your grandfather at sea, but your mother had some personal tragedies of losing
Yes.
a couple babies along the way too during that same time.
Mm-hmm.
So it had to be very traumatic, and they really held together. And I almost wonder, and I'm not sure if you intended this, or maybe this is just what your father was, but he sort of adopted that role of helping to get the family through it when your mom was down, and I'm sure it's very depressing and melancholy when you lose a child like that, and your father sort of tried to pick her spirits up, give her space that she needed, pick her spirits up, give her a hug when she needed it, do what he could to get things by. But he also sort of adopted that into the football field too when things were down. Of course, he would get frustrated when somebody would drop a pass or he'd throw an interception or anything, but he sort of had that same attitude. And from what I gathered from the book, that he would try to keep the troops together and talk to the guys in the huddle and keep things going.
There's no question about that. My mother was much more of a realist and kind of a practical person. My father never knew a stranger. I don't know if that part of that is just sort of being from a large family or what it is, but my father just always had that attitude that you could be whatever you chose to be if you just worked hard enough. And as I said, my mother was much more serious minded. My dad was much more humorous and saw the humor in a lot of things. And I think that's part of what made their relationship a very special one, is that they each supported each other. And my dad had sort of a contentious relationship with the media during his playing career, in particular his coaching career. And my mother was like his biggest, cheerleader and advocate. And she was, so it's kind of like the roles reversed then, Early on, it was more my father kind of like, come on, Gloria, you can do this. You can do whatever you want, you want to do or whatever. And, later in life, it was more my mom, come on, Stub, get yourself together here. Kind of thing.
What a trooper your mother must have been, because it's, the weather. I mean, you talk about many times your father's cursing the field at Oregon. It's a mud hole, and sort of every field that he played at, even at Oregon State when they played there. I think he refers to that as a mud hole too, because it just rains all the time there in the Northwest.
Central Valley, yeah.
she sits there through game after game, many of these home games and some of the games that were close by, and this torrential downpours at times. And boy, what a trooper she had to be to sit there and support him like that.
Oh, yeah, which reminds me of sitting in Metropolitan Stadium in Minneapolis before they had the dome, right? So we used to sit out in 30 below zero with sleeping bags on.
Oh, yeah, it gets cold.
Parkers and whatever. Yeah, so, yeah. Once a football fan, always a football fan.
I guess so. Now, your father, he's in Pro Football Hall of Fame. He's in the College Football Hall of Fame. He's a stud, but you know that you're good when you have multiple nicknames that people call you. Now, I'm just going to name off a few of these names that that you call them in the book. Of course, Norm, people called him Van for his last name, Stubb, which we already talked about. Some of the newspapers called him the Cinderella Boy at one point.
Yeah.
The Dutchman, which many of us know, and that's the title of your book, as the Dutchman.
Right.
Just so you know that he had to be good and had to be well liked by his teammates and the media and everybody to have this many nicknames.
Yeah, I think so. And he was very charismatic. So he obviously drew attention to himself. But he could back it up, and I think he was a natural leader on the field. And getting back to that his personality, he never gave up. And that's one thing I realized, kind of researching his Oregon days. There were, particularly that last year, 48, there are many times they were behind going into the fourth quarter, and somehow it was like always pulled it out, and they so there was sort of this attitude that you can't give up. They're going to pull it out. We'll figure it out. We're going to find what the weakness is with the defense, and then But I think that was sort of a part of his professional career too. He's real good about being patient about figuring out what weaknesses were, and that brings me to a great story. I got to interview Bob Sanders. He was a running back, a fullback at the University of Oregon, and I was fortunate to interview him before he passed away. And he told me about this one play, which I write about in the book. And I don't remember the team now, but he said, your dad kept calling the same play. It was like off tackle right, or whatever. And we just ran it play after play after play, and get back in the huddle, and your dad would call it again. And he said, well, we're getting 3 and 4 yards every single time. Why would we quit running it? We'll wear him down, And Bob said, that's when your dad started calling me the Blaster. That was his nickname. So Dad was good about giving nicknames too.
I guess it takes one to know one here to dish it
Yeah.
out. And he seemed to really have a great rapport with the guys. I mean, I love the scene when he first shows up at campus at the practice field. Your mother sort of takes him a long way around to get him to the campus to spend more time with them as they're courting there and getting to know each other. And he gets to the field, and maybe he knows a few of the guys, like you said, but they're sort of ribbing. He's just trying to find where the coach's office are, and they're sort of giving him the business a little bit. He gives a little bit back to him as he goes in there. I think he gained a little bit of respect from his teammates in doing so.
Yeah. Well, that's part, that's part of sports, right?
Right.
That's how God, I shouldn't say just guys, but that's how you kind of assess each other, right? You give a little, you get a little kind of thing.
Right.
But,
it's always fun to give somebody the business, isn't it?
Yeah, there you go. See, can he take it? Can he not take it? Yeah.
Right. So, okay, I guess everything in his career and sort of the flow of the book, it comes to this period of time, 1948. It's, a season of promise for the Oregon Ducks. They Coach Oliver he stepped down. Coach Aiken comes in. He's, the guys have been working hard all year. This core group of guys that have been together for a couple of years now are sort of coming into their own, and they're veterans. There's a mix of young players, war veterans like your father and some of the other guys, and they're really putting together a great season. And game after game, like you said, they're behind in games, they're coming back, and it's kind of expected that they're going to come back, and then they come into a buzzsaw of the national champions from the previous year, the Michigan Wolverines, when they go and play them, and just sort of, I think it's sort of a light bulb moment for them that, hey, this team's we're good, but maybe this is an echelon we need to aspire to, is what Michigan's doing. I sort of think that was a great point in the book where you talked about.
Well, that was their only defeat, and it wasn't in conference, but it was kind of like, well, we only lost by, I don't remember the score now. It was like, I don't know, I think a touchdown. It was a pretty
I think
close
it was
game.
just one score game.
Yeah, and it was kind of like, well, if we can hang with the national champions, then So I think it sort of set the tone for the rest of the season. Unlike Oregon playing the University of Georgia this year, and I went to that game, and it was kind of like, welcome to the SEC,
Okay, now that's an interesting thing. So here you are. You definitely have connections to the University of Oregon. Both your parents went there. You live in Georgia now, so I'm assuming you're a Bulldogs fan.
Yeah,
and,
sure.
So that had to be sort of a bittersweet moment with those two teams playing. Who were you rooting for in that game?
Oh, well, I mean, obviously my heart was with the Ducks, of course, but I mean, I know the talent that's at Georgia, they're just a phenomenal team. And they've last couple of seasons, they've had a phenomenal team, but the Ducks are great. They managed to put together wonderful teams year after year, but I have to say, the SEC is some pretty serious football.
It definitely is. And I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, so I can appreciate the Georgia Bulldogs, because the last 2 years we've got some great draft picks.
There you go.
With two of them, and last year with the receiver picking. So that's great stuff. So yeah. So okay. So they go through this regular season. They lose to Michigan, but then they sort of have one focus of, they want to represent the Pac-8 at the time, the conference that they played in. Right. I believe it was a Pac-8 they were called then. They change their names all the time, like the weather, I think. Right. But they had that goal of being the representative in the Rose Bowl. That was sort of their main focal point.
Goal, yeah.
And they wanted to win as many games as they could. And actually, they had to win all the games after losing to Michigan, I believe, as you state in the book. And so they do that. They succeed. They win all the games. And you have great, play action and things happening in the game, a great write-up of each game. And some of them are in great detail, and really get me into the flow of the game as a reader, and say, boy, I felt like I was there some 70, 80 years ago, whenever this was, to be at that game. And it was just fantastic. The Civil War of Oregon, which is Oregon State.
Right.
And, the Beavers had won 9 straight over your dad's team. Maybe you could describe that moment, that season finale.
Well, so at this point, the expectation was, in conference, they were undefeated. So once they defeated Oregon State, the assumption was they would get chosen to represent the Pac-8 in the Rose Bowl. And I didn't know this story either. So this was interesting to learn. To this day, there are not very many University of Oregon alumni that don't know this story. To this day, they have quite a bit of animosity to the University of Washington, because back then, how they chose the bowl representatives, each team had one vote. They had one person as a vote, and it typically would be a professor or whoever they chose as a representative. So each school had one vote. And so the Pac-8, there's the California schools, and then there's the Northwestern schools. And what happened was Washington, this is what they found out later, wasn't apparent at the time, but that Washington had voted for California, was it University of California, to go over the Ducks. And it was like, that was like heresy. No, we stick together, So the Oregon, usually would be Oregon, Washington, Idaho, all stuck together. And then there was California. And so as it was, Oregon was not chosen to represent the Pac-8 in the Rose Bowl. And that just was, the whole campus exploded over that. And, but, it's like anything in life, right? That door closed, but another door opened. And it was also an opportunity that had never been offered to the University of Oregon, which was a bid to go to the Cotton Bowl.
Yeah, and that bid was, very, like you said, it was the first time it ever happened, but it brought its own problems because at the time this was happening, there was some Jim Crow laws and some other things with racial tension, especially in the South, where this game's played near Dallas, Texas.
Right.
And your dad was really, and along with some other teammates, was really a proponent of helping some of his teammates to be able to participate. And maybe you could speak to that a bit.
Yeah, so there were 4 Black players on the roster at the University of Oregon, 2 of whom were excellent track. There were runners on the track team. University of Oregon has always had a very strong track team. And so they ran track and they also played football. And so when the bid was extended to the University of Oregon, it was like, yeah, we would like for you to play in the Cotton Bowl, but you can't bring your, Black players with you. And the precedent had already been set a year before that would be acceptable. So Oregon said, they all got together as a team, and it was a team vote, and it was unanimous. If our players don't go, the Black players don't come with the team and don't stay together, then we won't go. And so the coach called, and I remember the person he had to have the conversation with now, but it's in the book, said, we will all come, but they will be a part of the roster. And then it became, well, okay, they can play, but they can't stay at the hotel where you're staying at the hotel. But there was, I guess, the silver lining of that was horrible, of course, and we're all in a different generation now, and we say, how could that happen? But as it turns out, a very prominent physician who lived in the Dallas area, he was also the head of the NAACP, welcomed these athletes to stay in their homes. They were chauffeured to the practice field. They had maids who did their laundry for them. They ate with the players. They did all the team meetings and all of that. And I was able to, I didn't get to interview these guys, but I did find some wonderful articles. And it was the way they saw the situation was like, it opened their eyes to what it was like to see a very successful Black physician, head of the NAACP, to live in his home in a very, nice community and be accepted. And so these are all teachable moments, right? Now we see it from a different vantage point, but just put yourself back in 1949, what that meant to them, but also to the teammates, right?
Yeah, right. And I think you even mentioned some of the locals that were African American sort of got to see this happening, seeing these Black heroes coming down from Oregon, great stars, and the way they're getting chauffeured around from the Good Doctors folks that were doing that. And I think some of the white players in Oregon even ingest, sort of again, busting their chops a little bit. Hey, you guys have it better than us here. You're getting a maid service and getting your socks washed and everything else. So I thought that was kind of a great moment in the book too. So, So I'm not going to spoil too much because you go through, and your coverage of the Cotton Bowl game is, impeccable. I loved it. You took
Thank
us
you.
almost every play by play, and it had to be, some great research you did on your part to do that. And you also got to interject what was, possibly going through your father's head and some decisions he made. I don't know if maybe those were in some of the letters, or maybe your dad talked to you about it at some point in time, but they fit right into the flow of the story. And I can imagine it happening. So I thought that was very well done there too.
Thank you. Thank you.
We won't give up the ending on that, and go into some other
Okay.
things. But your father goes on and has a great career. He ends up ending his college career at that point for some things that you took
Right.
in the book, some reasons why. Ends up signing contract with the Los Angeles Rams. He's one of their fourth round draft picks, and has a brilliant career with them. And maybe you could just talk about your father's professional playing career.
My dad, and how that all happened too. He still had a year of eligibility at the University of Oregon. And I wasn't aware of that either. So that's something that I learned in researching the book, was that, of course, there were people that were fans, of course, that were disappointed that he didn't stay on one more year. But it was hard to fault, I think, any athlete then. World War II was just over. People were, anxious to get on with their lives. And he had an offer to play in the pros, and, he took it. And
I think that would probably happen in today's world too.
oh,
You get
yeah.
paid or you don't get paid to play football. I think you're
Yeah,
probably going to
exactly.
go for the money.
Well, yeah. And I mean, we're not talking the money that the money is today, but, yes,
Right.
there was an opportunity to start a professional career in football, which he always used to say, I can't believe I get, paid money to play a game, but he always felt, he was very humble about that. And he was also very proud that he, out of the 9 children, the 8th of 9 children, that he was the only one to have a college degree. That meant a lot to him. But at any rate, he came to the Rams, and Bob Waterfield was the established quarterback there. And my dad was the rookie. And so his first season was 49. And back in the day, they used to have this kind of platoon offense. So they would have, Waterfield would either start the game or Dad would start the game, and whoever was hot would kind of stay in for a while. But that's how it used to be. But I'm very proud of the fact that in 1951, he set a record for the most yards passing in a single game, and that record still stands today. So that 72 years ago, that was set, and it still
Yeah.
stands, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I did a write-up on some of the highest scoring offenses of all time. And, of course, think the NFL is more geared at offense in our era that we're in right now than it was back when your dad
Right,
played. There's
right,
much more of a running game that it is now. Now we're more oriented to the pass. And of
right.
course that gives more scoring, and defenses are more restricted and everything. But I was surprised that that team that your dad and Bob Waterfield were quarterbacking back, and it was in that era, but they were both on the team. That is like in the top 5 of scoring offenses all time in the National Football League.
Yeah,
That's up there with the Chiefs from a couple years ago,
yeah.
and some of
Well,
these
they had
great teams, and it's
they had some
unbelievable.
great receivers, right? Crazy Legs Hirsch, remember that name? Tom Fears.
Right? Yeah.
They had some great receivers. And I guess I failed to say earlier when you were asking me about Jim Aiken, what Jim Aiken, we alluded to the passing game, but it was the T formation that was instrumental. And so my dad was kind of at the right place at the right time when the T formation, they started using it in colleges. And so that was sort of beginning in the era with in the 50s in the NFL too. The game just opened up. The passing game just opened up, and he just happened to have a great arm. He could throw it 50, 60 yards down the field, and it was kind of a wide open kind of offense. And he was able to take some of that to the Eagles. So he was with the Rams for 9 years, and then he did not see eye to eye. A new coach was coming in. I think it was Sid Gilman, and Sid Gilman wanted to call the plays, and my dad was like, no, I've been calling my own plays in college. So University of Oregon, he called his own plays. The Rams, he called his own plays. And then Sid Gilman said, no, I'm going to start running the offense. And my dad said, well, then you can trade me. Just don't trade me. You can trade me anywhere. Just don't trade me to the Eagles, because they were in cellar at the time. And that's where he got traded.
Probably just maybe out of spite even, huh?
I don't know, but that's back in the day. Players didn't have agents. They, it's just a different time.
Right.
And pretty much the owners the front office made the calls, and that's how that happened.
Yeah, and if I could tag on to when your dad was playing college football, I mean, he was at sort of World War II is sort of that transition point where there was single wing, double wing offenses being run prior, single platoon where guys would play both offense and defense, and you wouldn't substitute. There was some more strict and stringent substitution rules at the time. And it was sort of that year when your dad started college, that's when things started opening up. And, like you said, the T formation was happening down at Stanford and some other places and having some success. And, the single wing was sort of getting phased out and single platoon was getting phased out. And very fortuitous for your father that all happened. So he got to just concentrate on playing offense, and probably a big
it's all about protecting the pocket, right?
Right. Yeah. So it's many things that Coach Aiken was preaching and you had in the book. It's probably what coaches are saying to this very day on offenses, protect that quarterback. He's our, he's our guy, and we got to make sure he's standing up right at the end of the play.
There you go.
Well, Karen, it's been a delight to talk to you, and I want to make sure we give the opportunity for you to let's go ahead and say the name of your book again and where folks can get a copy of it at.
Yes, it's called The Dutchman and Portland's Finest Rose. It's a love story inspired by the life of football legend Norm Van Brocklin. My name is Karen Vanderyt, and you can visit my website at karenjvanderyt.com. And you also can just go to Amazon and type in the title or the author's name. And I have written 2 other books. They're memoir. And I guess in a way, this book reads a little bit like a memoir or a love story. But it's certainly a football book as well.
Well, it's a great story to follow along with. There's the football sprinkled in with it, just puts the cherry on top, and it's a great book. I think it's a book that probably anybody could enjoy, and probably many different age generations could enjoy this, because it's sort of transcends time. It's a great story of how relationships should be, both a man and wife, how the family relationship, and also how people can interact with each other, help each other out in times of need. And I thought it was just great, and I was very connected to the book as a reader, and I appreciate you writing it.
Well, you're very kind. I appreciate it very much, and it's been a pleasure to visit with you.
Same here. Okay, so folks, don't worry if you weren't able to write down the information that Karen just said. We have it in the show notes. We have links to her site. We'll get you there. And also on pigskindispatch.com with the accompanying article. So no fret there. Karen Vanderyt, thank you very much for joining us and telling the story of your father and mother in this delightful book. And I highly recommend it to everybody.
It's been a pleasure and my honor. Thank you.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Jean Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I wanted to thank you for stopping by to listen to another episode here on the Sports History Network. Our podcasters are passionate about uncovering and sharing sports stories from yesteryear. And if you didn't know it already, we have over 30 shows across the network covering all sorts of sports history topics. In fact, here's a glimpse into one of our awesome podcasts here on the network.
Each week, the official Football Learning Academy podcast will take you deep into the history of pro football through interviews with players, coaches, or administrators in the NFL, as well as interviews with Pro Football Hall of Fame selectors, authors, and historians. You'll learn how the game evolved and important moments that shaped the sport into what it is today. And don't miss the Pro Football History Nugget of the Week. Listen to the official Football Learning Academy podcast on the Sports History Network.
How about that? I bet you're super hyped to go listen to that new podcast, right? Well, to learn about this show and all the other podcasts on the network, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/podcast. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/podcast. Head over there today to find your next favorite sports history podcast.